Welcome to this video. What we're going to do now is talk a little bit about the differences between prime lenses and zoom lenses. So you may have seen lenses like this, something that can change the focal length. So what is focal length, focal distance? That's going to be the curvature and how close up your lens is going to be. So for example, if I were to use this lens at a 24 millimeter, so that's going to be a relatively wider field of view. Right now we're using a 28 millimeter on a micro four thirds sensor, so it's going to crop in a bit, but it's still a relatively curved, wide shot. Now, for example, we are at a 24 on this lens. If we were to zoom in all the way to a 70, this is going to be a more compressed shot, and it's going to crop into the image more, and you're going to be able to achieve a little more shallow depth of field, and it's going to be a different effect. Essentially, a wider shot will make you feel like you're right there, especially if the camera's up close. That's why I like to shoot on a wide angle lens and bring it close. Makes you feel like you're right there. But let's get into some of the differences, especially the technical differences. So if we go to our main shot here, right here we have a prime lens. Now again, a prime lens is going to be a lens that is a fixed focal length. What that means is that this is a 50 millimeter lens, and this lens is not going to be able to zoom. It's not going to be able to go wider. This is going to be a 50 millimeter shot. So what are the benefits of using a prime lens? Well, number one, they're going to be relatively sharper than most zoom lenses. This lens right here is a Canon 24-70, and it's an f4. Already, compared to this lens, the aperture doesn't open up as much. That's going to be number two. So this lens can get me wide shots, medium shots, and close-up shots, whereas this lens is only going to be able to get me a 50 millimeter shot. So why use it? Pretty simple. Why you'd want to use a prime lens instead is because you're going to be able to get more shallow depth of field. It's typically going to be sharper at that focal length, and you're going to get more of a unique look depending on which lenses you use. I love these old vintage lenses because they have a little more characteristic. There's so many elements in this lens, and it's harder to get light from one end to the other. This lens is really good, but I can't open up the aperture the same as this one. This lens right here, you can open things up so much more. You can let in more light, and effectively you can get more of that blurry background. And the lens is going to be typically sharper at that 50 millimeter versus this lens. So if you're taking cinematography very seriously, prime lenses are the way to go. They're also cheaper, but if you can get a good zoom lens, then you don't have to worry about packing, 4 or 5 of these lenses. This is what we've been using for the entirety of the course, these old contact Zeiss, specifically the 28 millimeter and the 85. Those are the only 2 lenses we've been using for this entire YouTube course. So again, a really nice lens. They're usually built a little bit better. I love prime lenses. So let's compare it to a zoom lens. This is going to be a 70-200. Again, they have 24 to 70s, they have 16 to 35s, everything else. But as you can see, this lens is so big, there's so many elements in here, and it's harder to get a sharper image. That's why the good ones cost so much. But again, if you are filming events, if you're shooting weddings, this is going to be a great option. Whereas this lens, you can't zoom in there and get the shots that you need all the time. I love these lenses, but a lens like this, you can get a 70-200, you can get right in there. If you get a 24-70 like this, so if you were to pick up a lens like this, 24-70, and then get a 70-200, you would have every range for focal distance. You can get every shot. The only downside is it's not going to be the sharpest image at that focal length unless you get the very, very expensive cinema quality ones. But that's effectively it. There are pros and cons to each. As you can see, like, these lenses are great. I've owned these in the past, but typically I use prime lenses because, you know, I do film myself quite a bit, and I will use, you know, zoom lenses. Like for example, I got one right over here. This is going to be a cheaper one. Let me cut to my close-up here. So this is going to be a micro four thirds zoom lens. This is going to be, what is this one? A 14 to 42. So you can get 14, which is very wide, to a 42, which is, you know, closer to a 50. And because this is built for a micro four thirds, which is a big difference as well. If you're using a micro four thirds size sensor, then if you get micro four thirds size lenses, then it's going to be a true focal length. So to break that down for you, if I were to use a 14 millimeter micro four thirds sensor, as you can see it's small here, I will get a very wide shot. Whereas if I were to use a older lens or you know, a Canon lens, then a 50 millimeter would be cropped in 2 times, whereas a 14 would be a true 14. It would be very, very wide. The pros of using a prime lens, it's typically sharper, it's typically better at that focal length, and you can get a better aperture. You can open up the aperture better for the most part. Again, in f1.7, that's going to be hard to get on a zoom lens. You're going to have to pay a lot of money. Whereas this lens, yes, you get so many more focal lengths within the lens, but again, you only get an f4. So you get more stops of light. You have a better ability to shoot in low light with a prime lens. And this is just one example. These are just 2 different styles. Again, you can get different ones. For this course, we've been using a 28, which is the shot now, a 28 2.8 contact Zeiss Yashica, and we have this old lens mounted. So if we look at the back, as you can see right here, this old mount, let me cut to the other shot. So if we look at this lens on the back here, we've actually put on an adapter so that we got CY to EOS. And then we also have a mount that's EOS to MFT, which is micro four thirds. So I know that's a lot to take in, but again, if you want to go vintage, you can. But if you want to as well, you can pick up, you know, lenses that are more like this. So you could get, for example, an Olympus. Yeah, this is going to be an Olympus 14 to 42. We've been using this for some shots, for like the overhead shot. And I love this. This is a good little cheap lens. If you're starting out, there's nothing wrong with using a cheap zoom lens. Again, it's not until you understand your cameras and your lenses where you should even be stepping up and, you know, getting into other, you know, specific focal lengths and whatnot. So that's the main differences. Again, zoom lenses typically not as sharp, but you have a wider range of focal lengths. You can get your wide, medium, and close-ups all in one, but it does come at a cost in terms of your overall image quality. So that's all I have for you in this video. Stay tuned. We got more for you in the next ones.